Hello, everybody, and welcome again to our Thursday Thoughts segment where we say goodbye to the gospel of the week behind and look forward to the one ahead. And last Sunday, we had from the Gospel of John 12, Jesus predicting, in a way, his own death and talking about how that would establish his reputation among all peoples. He did this when some foreigners, some Greeks, showed up and asked to see him, in essence asking who he was and what he really had to teach them. And he said to all of us, if you're going to teach anything about me, teach this. And all of it was centered around this idea of reputation. What people would call him, what people would think of him, what people would think of when they spoke of him or heard his name. Now, this is also really critical for us as faithful church people. It's something we should consider, and we often shunt it aside in favor of teaching or saying whatever it is that we think is needful or that we want to say in the moment. And that is a critical mistake. Notice the Greeks and the disciples both had their agenda of what they thought should be said or done in a given moment. And in that moment, Jesus gave them something completely different that they had no way to process by their own expectations. And Jesus was pretty clear that when that happens, it's not God's identity that changes, it's people's expectations and the way they talk about him that are supposed to change. Now, we're not really comfortable with that as a church, and I have some good news and some bad news about that. Let's start with the bad news. The reputation of Jesus out there beyond us and the reputation of church out there. And by the way, in most people's minds, those are kind of the same thing because that's what we've tried to teach them. The reputation is not very good. When I go out there and I talk about faith, God, church, or whatever, I have to be very careful because a litany of people have preceded me who I think have not been really careful about tending to this reputation. Now, I'm not saying they were bad people. In fact, most of them were very good people. They just simply had an agenda or a thought or whatever that they wanted to share, and they went out and there it was. And it might not have been the right thought or the right word for that relationship, for that environment, but they didn't really care or tend to enough to that kind of reputation. Instead, they wanted the reputation of being the ones who brought the word and who brought Jesus to people and did whatever. And you know what? It didn't end up enhancing Jesus' reputation. It actually ended up kind of breaking it. Because when people hear about church or God out there, here's what they instinctively think. These people are holier than thou. These people have some kind of agenda. These people may be well-meaning, but I don't really want to join their church or their club or their whatever, and that's really what they want me to do. And underneath all of this is some kind of self-centered motive that they want to convince me of, if nothing else, to believe like them, and that's just not me, and therefore I don't fit in God's family or in God's church or in God's club. Immediately, when someone perceives they don't fit in God's family, we should re-examine the message that we are sending. How in the world did it get out there in the first place that this was a club that you could join or be rejected by, that you could be inside or outside? What kind of God did we teach who is in some places but not in others? With some people, but not with most people. Somehow that got out there, and I fear that we've participated in this. And I'll tell you how easily it happens. You don't have to intentionally teach that. You don't have to have any evil intent to do it. Instead, you just go out there and say, well, God is the lawgiver, and here are the laws, and we must all follow these, or God does not like us. Implying that there are some people that God really likes who are able to keep the law and other people that God doesn't, and they're not keeping the law. Or It all depends on what you believe. And if you believe in Jesus Christ, then you are saved. But if you don't believe in Jesus Christ, you're not. Implying that your own strength of belief or your own mental mindset is what saves you. And God will either check you off on this box or check you off on that box, depending on what you do. Or, hey, we are really wonderful people and we have so much to share. Let's go out there and share all our bounty of knowledge or all our bounty of wealth or whatever it is, implying that the people inside who are powerful are the ones who are really smart or the ones who are really indoctrinated or the ones who have all the financial resources or whatever. And if you don't have those things, you don't really belong in the same way. And you can receive God, but you can't really be a bearer of God. I fear that we have done all these things. And so the reputation that God has is the God who's on our side, the God of the people who are in church, not the God who is out there. And the reputation that we have are the people who think they are powerful and want everybody else on their side and are willing to reject the people who aren't. That's the bad news. There is good news. Here it is. God is still God. Even when we speak of God imperfectly, God is still God. God is still that God from John chapter 12, who said, I came to gather everyone. And I give up my life not for the perfect people, because they wouldn't need it, but for the people who are in need of love, in need of support, in need of someone whispering in their ear saying, even if the whole rest of the world rejects you, I will still be yours, and you will still be with me. And that is as certain as life and death, as certain as your very existence and mine. This is what God still says. That's not in question. The question is, are we willing as church people to re-examine our messages and our assumptions so we make sure that everything we say and do reflects that message that God gave us, that central identity and reputation that God gave us in John chapter 12? Or are we content to simply talk about the God that we expect and want God to be? Those are two different things. And that's absolutely worth thinking about. Do we deliver a God of expectations? Or do we deliver and live out a God of grace and love? Think about that in the things we do together and in the way in which you speak and live out God's faith in your life. That's it for John chapter 12. We are going to move on to the Gospel of Mark, the 14th and 15th chapter, as we hear Palm Sunday and Passion Sunday talking about Jesus' procession into Jerusalem and his death. And that precedes, of course, Easter and his resurrection, which is coming the week after. Until then, we will see you Sunday here, lightofthespirit.church, or wherever you find us. God bless.